What if the person who vowed to love you was plotting to destroy you? When Billy Wright missed a family dinner, his sister knew something was wrong. But nothing could prepare her for the horror waiting behind his unlocked door. He was supposed to meet his sister for dinner. He didn't show up, he didn't call, and he didn't answer his phone. Initially, she thought he'd just gotten stuck at work, that he lost track of time, or maybe fell asleep. That's what she told herself during the 15-minute drive to his apartment. That's what she was still telling herself when she pulled into the parking lot and saw his car parked out front, exactly where it had been that morning. She knocked, no answer, the lights were on. The door wasn't locked. What happened next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it changed everything. Billy Wright was the kind of man people didn't worry about. Quiet, reliable, intentional with his time, and careful with his emotions. He kept things simple not because he lacked depth, but because he'd learned that peace was worth protecting. So when someone came into his life offering a kind of connection that felt all-consuming, it didn't immediately register as unsafe. It felt welcome. After years of emotional distance, someone wanted to be close. And that closeness felt like comfort until it didn't. This is a story about a man who underestimated just how dangerous it can be to ignore your instincts. It's about what happens when love turns into control, when attention becomes possession, and when one person's silence meant to keep the peace ends up costing them everything. The people who knew Billy believed he'd never let something go too far. That if he felt unsafe, he'd say something. But he didn't, and by the time they realized why, it was already too late. This is the story of Billy Wright, and the relationship that would end in tragedy. Billy had just started over, quietly, without ceremony. After 7 years with someone who'd become more distant than dishonest, he didn't leave angry, just empty. He moved to Charlotte with a new job offer and a 2-bedroom apartment that was more space than he needed. He didn't talk about the breakup much. When people asked, he said it was mutual. And in most ways, it was. Dating wasn't part of the plan, not yet. He told his co-workers he was focused on work, that he needed time to get his life in order. But late one night, after a quiet dinner and a few drinks, he downloaded the app. He scrolled without much effort. It felt more like passing time than looking for anything real. Then came Velda. A fresh start, a chance encounter. Velda's charm was magnetic, yoga poses, sunrise photos, and a jar of homemade tea. But beneath her healed facade lay obsession ready to erupt. She messaged him first. Her profile was bright, photos of smoothie bowls, yoga poses, and sunlit book stacks. She had a sharp sense of humor and an ease that cut through his usual reserve. She asked about his taste in music, his favorite time of day, what he'd cook for someone who deserved the effort. She said she liked how calm he seemed, that he had a steadiness to him. He didn't know how to answer that, but it made him smile. They met a few days later. She chose the place, a juice bar tucked into the corner of a shopping plaza. Afterward, they walked along the lake. She talked openly about her clients, her routines, her belief that people meet for a reason. Before they said goodbye, she handed him a jar of loose tea she'd blended herself. It helps with rest, she told him, if you let it. Billy wasn't used to people like her. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ease into things. She spoke in absolutes, said she felt connected to him, said it felt right. That kind of certainty was unfamiliar. But it didn't feel like pressure. Not yet. He didn't tell many people about her at first. Just his sister, Julia, and his coworker, Robert. He said she was interesting. Intense maybe, but smart, confident, and after so many quiet days, it felt good to be seen. Robert noticed the difference. Said Billy was texting faster, laughing more. Julia was more cautious, but she didn't push. She told herself he deserved this. Whatever it was. Velda began texting him early in the mornings, sending voice notes, pictures of her breakfast, her walks, the sunrise. She called their connection rare, said she hadn't felt this way in years. Billy wasn't sure how to respond to that. He said thank you. He asked how her day was going. He told himself he didn't need to know yet where it was heading. There were moments, small ones, when something didn't sit right. She didn't like when he took too long to reply. She once asked if he'd had second thoughts about her. He brushed it off. Said she was probably just nervous. He tried not to read too much into it. He wasn't sure how to say no to her, so he didn't. Sometimes people mistake being chosen for being safe. And when someone is willing to give you all of their attention, it's easy to overlook how much they expect in return. Intensity and intimacy can look the same in the beginning. Until they don't. Texts turned into traps. Gifts became demands. When Velda asked for his key, Billy hesitated, but giving in would be the first step toward his own grave. It wasn't long before Velda was part of Billy's everyday life. Not just weekends or evenings here and there, but woven into the routines he used to keep for himself. She started leaving things at his place: shampoo, extra clothes, a canvas bag of supplements, and then asked for a key. Not in passing, but as a sign of trust. She said it mattered to her that having access was about closeness. About security. She wanted to feel like she belonged in his space. Billy hesitated. Not because he didn't care about her, but because the pace made him uneasy. Still, he handed her the spare and told himself it was normal to share things when you were trying to build something. That same week, she posted a photo of them, her head on his shoulder, the edge of his laptop just visible in the background. The caption read, "Peace looks like this," followed by hashtags, #HealedLove, #ForeverEnergy, #AlignedSouls. It got over 400 likes. He didn't comment. He hadn't even known she'd taken it. Billy didn't love being online. He didn't post much himself. When he asked her to maybe check with him first before sharing their moments, she told him he should be proud, that celebrating their connection was part of honoring it. That love wasn't something you kept quiet about. So he didn't bring it up again. The texts became more frequent, then calls, then video messages. She started FaceTiming during his lunch breaks and calling him in the morning before meetings. When he didn't reply quickly, she'd send voice notes, some of them short, some longer than 5 minutes. They often started light, her breakfast, her new yoga sequence, but sometimes turned halfway through. "I feel like I'm always chasing your attention," she said in one. "I don't want to be where I'm not wanted." Billy adjusted. Silently. He put his phone on vibrate during calls but checked it more often. He left work early some days. Canceled a weekend trip with Robert. Skipped a friend's birthday dinner. It was just easier that way. Easier than the guilt she'd express if she thought he'd chosen anyone else over her. He started withdrawing from the group chat he used to respond to first. Messages from Julia went unread for a day or two. His coworkers said he seemed distant. He told them he was just tired. When he did see friends, he stopped bringing Velda. Not because he was hiding her, but because it never went well. She'd find something off in a conversation, call him cold afterward, ask why she felt invisible. Once, after a work function, she sat in the passenger seat of his car and didn't speak the entire ride home. There was a moment about a month in where she asked for the login to his streaming apps, said it was just for convenience. When he hesitated, she got quiet, said it felt like he didn't trust her. He gave it to her that night. Julia noticed the shift, but Billy didn't say much. When she asked how he was, he said they were fine. "She's just passionate," he added. "She feels things big." He didn't say what it cost him to keep her calm. Around the time, he started journaling again. Nothing dramatic, just short entries. Loose thoughts. On one page, dated 2 days after the streaming password conversation, he wrote, "She loves hard. I just wish it didn't feel like pressure." He didn't show it to anyone. He told himself this was just how some people love. That maybe he was the one who needed to loosen up. That he'd been with someone emotionally distant for so long, he didn't know what closeness looked like anymore. He thought it was about compromise. But she saw every hesitation as betrayal. It was subtle, at least at the start. Question here, a look there. Nothing that stood out too much on its own. But over time, Billy noticed that every conversation started to bend back toward the same theme. Whether he was being honest. Whether he was telling her everything. Velda began asking about women in his life. Not just the ones he saw in person, but the ones in his phone, old friends, coworkers, anyone who had ever sent a message that didn't include her. She asked why he kept in touch with people who no longer played a role in his day-to-day. Why he hadn't mentioned someone before. Why, if he had nothing to hide, he still locked his screen. Once, he left his phone on the table while he went to the bathroom. When he came back, she was scrolling through it. She said she was just curious. That if the roles were reversed, she wouldn't have minded. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything at all. She started mentioning patterns. Said she'd been with people who lied. That she could always tell. That the energy shifted when someone was pulling away. She said Billy had that look now. That she knew how these things went. That she'd rather be hurt now than dragged along. Billy had never been the kind of person to pick fights. He avoided conflict whenever he could. So instead of pushing back, he started adjusting, little things, mostly. Quieter phone calls, shorter answers. Less information, not because he had anything to hide, but because everything seemed to become an argument. He tried once, just once, to ask for space during work hours. Told her that he was in back-to-back meetings most of the day and needed to stay focused. Velda went quiet for the rest of the afternoon. That night, she sent a voice message. "I don't want to feel like I'm too much for someone. If I am, just say that. Don't push me away without telling me why." Robert Dunn, the coworker who shared a team with Billy, noticed the shift. He used to laugh, Robert said later. Then he started whispering at work and jumping every time his phone buzzed. The messages kept coming, sometimes soft, almost apologetic, sometimes erratic, angry, then tender, then angry again. She'd tell him he was everything she needed, and hours later accuse him of not caring at all. Billy stopped sharing his location. It wasn't to hide, he just wanted a break from the commentary. But Velda noticed. She texted him 3 times in a row. "Why can't I see where you are? Are you with someone? Is that why you've been distant?" She started showing up unannounced. Said she was nearby. Said she had a feeling. Once she met him outside his office. Another time she let herself into his apartment and was waiting for him on the couch. When he asked how long she'd been there, she said, "Long enough to know something's different." Julia, his sister, had always known when something was off with him, and now he was harder to reach. His answers were shorter. He didn't tell stories the way he used to, just said things were fine. When she finally asked directly if he was okay, he paused, then told her the truth. He said he couldn't breathe around Velda anymore, that it felt like everything he did was being graded, that he was tired of feeling like he was failing someone without knowing why. Julia told him he needed to get out, that this wasn't something to wait out. "He told me she was getting scary," she said, "but I think part of him still felt responsible for how she might handle it." Billy started responding slower, shorter messages, less warmth. He thought maybe if he pulled back gently, things would settle. That if he didn't provoke anything, she'd move on quietly. That's what he hoped. But even when he took a step back, she was already a step ahead. If this story got to you, the injustice, the pain, the truth, please hit subscribe. These stories deserve to be heard, and we're just getting started. Chaotic childhood. Hospitalizations, burned bridges. Velda's past wasn't just troubled, it was a blueprint for violence. And Billy was about to become her final chapter. Velda didn't talk much about where she came from. When she did, the details changed depending on who was asking. Sometimes her parents were deeply religious. Other times, emotionally cold. She said they moved often, that she never stayed in one place long enough to feel settled. What stayed consistent was the sense that she'd grown up waiting for structure, for attention, for someone to stay. She transferred schools nearly every year until high school. Teachers noted that she seemed bright but easily distracted. One wrote that she struggled to manage small disappointments. Another said she had difficulty with authority, especially when she felt misunderstood. Friendships came in short bursts, intense and full of promise, then suddenly quiet. By 18, she was living with a family friend after her relationship with her mother fell apart. She enrolled in a local community college but dropped out within the first semester. That same year, she was hospitalized briefly after an overdose. It wasn't something she told people about. Even those closest to her only found out after the fact. She said later it was just a low moment and moved on quickly from the conversation. Over the next several years, she drifted. She took jobs that sounded good on paper: wellness coach, bookstore assistant, yoga instructor, but rarely stayed longer than a few months. She'd often quit without much notice, saying she needed to protect her energy or that people were starting to disappoint her. Isabel Fox, a former roommate, remembered how unpredictable things could get. She could be magnetic, the kind of person who made you want to do better just by being around her. But if you didn't text her back in an hour, she'd say you'd abandoned her. It always escalated fast. You couldn't just explain yourself. She'd already decided what your silence meant. Romantic relationships followed the same rhythm: fast starts, long conversations, emotional highs that felt like certainty. Then came the questions, the accusations, the need for constant reassurance that often exhausted the people who tried to love her. One of her former partners said that during a road trip, she threatened to take the next flight home because he took a phone call without telling her who it was. He thought it was a joke. It wasn't. Velda began therapy in her late 20s, attending 8 sessions before cutting it off. William Schaefer, the therapist who worked with her, remembered someone who was deeply reactive to emotional distance. She wanted connection urgently, but she didn't trust it once she had it, he said. She struggled to hold space between people. If you didn't match her intensity, it felt like rejection. He described her with what he called extreme emotional dysregulation. She saw closeness in ways that often ended up pushing people away. And then she'd tell herself they were never truly committed in the first place. There was rarely a middle ground. People were either safe or threatening. If you cared, you had to prove it constantly. And if you didn't or couldn't, that proof was taken away from you and replaced with something else, something Velda decided was closer to the truth. Most people didn't stay long. Some left quietly. Others drifted out when they couldn't keep up with her pace. Over time, it seemed that the only relationships that lasted were the ones Velda could control. And even those were fragile. The more someone mattered to her, the more pressure they carried. What started as affection quickly became expectation. And any small shift in energy was taken as a warning sign that they were about to walk away. Billy didn't know her past, but he was about to become its final chapter. Billy held on longer than anyone expected. He didn't want to leave in anger, and he didn't want things to end with conflict. For weeks, he convinced himself that space might be enough, that if he stayed calm and careful, things would return to something manageable. But nothing changed. If anything, the tension kept building. Every call, every message, felt like it came with a weight attached. He was sleeping less, checking his phone even when it wasn't ringing. He stopped talking about his day to the people closest to him, mostly because there was nothing good to say. And when Julia asked, directly this time, if he was okay, he didn't brush it off. He just shook his head. "I need to get out of this," he told her. "I don't know what she'll do." Julia offered him her guest room. Quiet, no questions. He packed a duffel bag, locked the door to his apartment, and stayed with her for a few nights. It was the first stretch of uninterrupted quiet he'd had in weeks. He didn't say much, but Julia noticed how often he looked at his phone, even when he wasn't expecting anything. Blocking Velda's number was a step he didn't take lightly. He stared at the screen for a while before he finally did it. That silence didn't last long. Within hours, she found another way in. She borrowed a friend's phone to call him. When that didn't work, she moved to email. 18 messages in one day. Some rambling, some aggressive. Some with only a sentence. Others that read like journal entries. One said, "You said you wouldn't disappear." Another read, "If you think I'm going to be erased that easily, you never knew me at all." He didn't respond. He muted the notifications. Julia asked if he wanted to get the police involved. He shook his head. "She hasn't done anything illegal," he said. "She's just upset." He didn't say it out loud, but part of him still believed that giving her a reaction would only make things worse. So he said nothing. Midweek, Billy told Julia he needed to run back to his place. He had to grab a few files for work and some clothes he'd left behind. He said he'd only be gone an hour. Julia asked if he wanted her to come. He said no. It's just a quick stop. What he didn't know, what no one could have known, was that Velda had already made her way back to the complex. For minutes. That's all it took. A spare key, a silent apartment, and 30 brutal stabs. The security footage shows Velda walking in, but what the cameras didn't catch will haunt you. Security footage shows her arriving 15 minutes before him. She wore a sweatshirt, carried a gym bag, and walked in like she lived there. She used the spare key he'd never asked her to return. Maybe he hadn't wanted to set her off. Maybe he hadn't gotten around to it. Either way, the key was still hers. There was no shouting. No raised voices. Nothing loud enough for the hallway microphones to register. The door opened. For minutes later, everything had changed. Billy never came back. He didn't text. Didn't call. He didn't respond when Julia asked what kind of takeout he wanted for dinner. And when she didn't hear from him that evening, she felt it immediately. Julia drove to Billy's apartment just after sunrise. She hadn't heard from him the night before. No messages. No call. He hadn't answered when she asked what kind of takeout he wanted. And when she tried again before bed, her text stayed delivered but unread. She told herself not to panic. Maybe he fell asleep early. Maybe he turned his phone off and forgot to check in. But something felt off. He'd promised to be gone for only an hour. And Billy didn't ignore people, not the ones he cared about. His car was still in the lot, parked in the same spot it had been the day before. She walked to his unit, knocked once, then again. Nothing. The door wasn't locked. Everything inside looked quiet. Shoes by the entry. His jacket still on the hook. A takeout container on the counter. The kind of silence that isn't just absence. It's stillness that doesn't feel right. He was on the floor, face down near the kitchen. His phone was next to his hand, screen dim but still lit. Julia froze. She didn't scream. She didn't rush over. She stepped back and reached for her phone. When she called 911, her voice was low, barely audible. He's on the floor. He's not moving. First responders arrived minutes later. They found Billy as she had. There was no forced entry. No overturned furniture. Nothing broken. No struggle that had spilled out across the apartment. Just a single room and a man who didn't get back up. The autopsy confirmed what the investigators quickly suspected. 30 stab wounds clustered around the chest and neck. Defensive wounds lined his forearms and hands, marks that showed he'd tried to stop it even for a moment. The knife was found in the sink. Still damp. Rinsed, but not clean. Velda's fingerprints were on the faucet. Her hair was found on the sleeve of his shirt. His phone was unlocked. One message sat unsent. It was addressed to Julia. It read, "She's here." Detective Martin Adams was the first to walk the scene in full. He stood in the doorway and took in what was missing just as much as what was there. No struggle, no theft, no sign of anyone trying to get in. It wasn't a break-in, he later said. It was something else entirely. Something personal. Velda was gone. No message. No call. No note left behind. Just a key that had never been returned. And a trail no one had found. Yet, Velda didn't disappear completely. She just made sure she couldn't be found right away. She left in Billy's car, taking his wallet and his debit card with her. By the time investigators traced the timeline, she was already in the mountains, hours outside Charlotte. There were no texts, no calls, no note, just the quiet logistics of someone who knew how to leave without drawing attention. The first hit on his card came just after midnight. A gas station. Then a remote cabin rental outside Asheville. The reservation was made under another name. A temporary phone number. One night booked, nothing extended. When law enforcement arrived the next morning, the cabin looked almost untouched. The bed had been pulled halfway back. The fridge was nearly empty. There was a single mug left in the sink. No messages left behind. No sign of struggle. She hadn't run in fear. She had simply left. That same morning, she posted on Instagram. A black screen. One line of white text, "You can't unlove someone who made you whole." It stayed up for less than an hour. But it was long enough. The timestamp helped narrow the search zone. Around 10 a.m., a sheriff's deputy spotted her walking along a quiet road near the cabin. Barefoot. Wearing the same sweatshirt she had been seen in on the building's security footage. She didn't run. She didn't ask why. She stepped into the car without a word. The officer who placed her in custody said she spoke only once. "I didn't want to hurt him," she said. "I just couldn't let him leave." She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't ask for anyone. At the station, she sat across the table in a small room with no windows and answered questions without emotion. No tears. No outbursts. Her voice never changed. When asked why she did it, she said, "He said he didn't love me anymore. I had nothing left." One of the detectives present later remarked that it wasn't the confession that caught them off guard, it was how easily it came out. She never hesitated. Never paused. It was like she had already told herself the story a dozen times before they ever heard it. In court, there would be no emotion, only what could be proven and what couldn't be explained away. The trial lasted 7 days. There were no outbursts, no tears. Velda sat quietly next to her attorney, Albert Malott, her expression unchanged no matter what was said about her. She didn't testify. She didn't look at the evidence being presented. Malott argued that the killing wasn't planned. That Velda had entered a dissociative state, triggered by abandonment, and reacted from a place of emotional collapse. He said she had no memory of stabbing Billy. That she only realized what she had done when she saw the blood. She wasn't planning an attack, he told the jury. She was trying to survive an emotional fracture. But the prosecution didn't need to raise their voice to make their point. Virginia Rodriguez walked the jury through the timeline. The emails. The drive. The knife packed in the gym bag. The spare key never returned. The 15 minutes she waited inside Billy's apartment. The search history on her phone. The social media post. She didn't snap, Rodriguez said. She planned it. She packed the knife. She waited. That's not dissociation. That's intent. Billy's phone contained the last thing he tried to say. A message that never sent. She's here. On his laptop, investigators found a file he'd started the night before. He hadn't saved it. The cursor was still blinking. If anything happens to me, it's Velda. His journal had been consistent for weeks. One-line entries, sometimes two. About pressure. About being unsure how to leave without making things worse. About how exhausting it was to be responsible for someone else's moods. Dr. Ilyana Kubiak, the forensic psychologist assigned to review the case, was clear in her testimony. This wasn't psychosis, she said. This was control, masked as love. It wasn't sudden. It built over time. The signs were there, but no one saw them until it was too late. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty of first-degree murder. Life without parole. The verdict answered the legal question. But not the harder one. Why wasn't he taken seriously? After the trial, Julia Wright started a foundation in Billy's name. It focused on support for male victims of emotional and coercive abuse. She said she wanted to create a space where men didn't have to justify why they were uncomfortable, or afraid, or trying to leave. Robert Dunn started speaking publicly too. He joked about it, he said. Called her intense. I didn't think he meant scared. I didn't ask him to explain. The case stayed mostly local. It didn't make national headlines. But in the circles where it was talked about, it made something clear: Billy's story wasn't unique. It was just rarely told. Dr. Kubiak, when asked to reflect after the trial, said something that stayed with the jury even after the sentencing. Male victims are rarely believed, she said. They're expected to endure, not protect themselves. When they do speak up, it's often seen as weakness. When they don't, people say they should have. Billy never said he was in danger. He just kept trying to make things work. He told the truth in small ways. In his entries. In the silence between his words. But nobody heard it clearly enough to stop what happened. Billy didn't die because he was weak. He died because he didn't think anyone would take his fear seriously. And he wasn't wrong. If you or someone you know is feeling unsafe in a relationship, whether through fear, pressure, or control, support is available. These stories don't always make it to courtrooms. Sometimes they end in silence. No one should have to wait until it's too late to be taken seriously. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. You deserve to be heard. Thank you for watching. If this story stayed with you, we hope you'll carry it forward with conversation, with awareness, with compassion for the people who don't always get to tell theirs. We release new stories regularly. If you'd like to hear more, you're welcome to subscribe or share this video with someone who might need to see it. Take care of yourself and take care of each other.